There was quite a bizarre story that unfolded at the start of 2024. What was found in a certain location under New York City was a hidden tunnel. Once the city gets word of this hidden network, they call a construction crew to the spot to fill up this tunnel. Those involved stand right in front of their way and do not move, to the point police had to arrive and arrest some of these men who did not want this tunnel to be filled. Enraged, the protesters were tearing down this building. They were also tearing down the wall that hid the tunnel. And as they were tearing down this wall, we got a glimpse of mattresses being taken out. One of the mattresses had a stain on it. Not only did the public get a glimpse of the mattresses, but we also got a glimpse of inside the tunnel as well. Many were horrified when they saw a child's seat, when they saw a child's car seat, leading many to believe that something nefarious was happening in this tunnel. Not only that, many also believed that this tunnel was older than what they were saying. With that being said, we're going to look at an older tunnel story that you had to be a part of the so-called elite. You had to have some notoriety to attend. We're going to flash back all the way to 1903, a banquet so unique that newspapers all around the world were covering the story, because this banquet that took place in October of 1903 took place inside a sewer. No rats invited. This then newly built dry run sewer was a $100,000 sewer project, provided an underground conduit between the marsh and the Cedar River. In the underground chamber, there were 450 prominent guests. The women in high heels and richly embroidered gowns filled down a ready-made stairway in a block-long section of the sewer between Wellington and Randolph Streets. Many of the guests were prominent political figures, including representatives of the state of Iowa or city officials, who were holding a convention in Waterloo. As I stated previously, there were news articles around the world talking about this bizarre dinner. This newspaper, today's Telegraph, even speaks of the prominence. The idea was Mayor Martin's, who has taken the lead in the plans for entertaining the guest. Invitations were issued to Mayor Golden Rule Jones of Toledo, Ohio, Mayor Harrison of Chicago, Governor Cummings of Iowa, and other prominent men. Other politicians from around the country invited to dine in a subterranean chamber some 30 feet, and I am sure 33 feet, under the surface of the ground. Even the dimensions of the tunnel share some odd numerology. But to clarify, this sewer was not some dark, dingy tunnel surrounded by human waste and rats. This was a freshly constructed dry run sewer, which had not been used for anything that relates to a sewer. But the idea of anybody hosting a banquet underground in a sewer, whether it is new or not, is odd in itself. But as I stated previously, this chamber has some bizarre numerology. It is exactly 13 feet high and 13 feet wide. The builder of this sewer said it had to be exactly 13 feet high and 13 feet wide. It cannot even be an inch off. But why was this dry run sewer even built in the first place? What was its purpose? What was the mainstream news saying about this sewer? Well, as you can see in the same article, for years, the west side of the city has suffered from annual ravages from the wicked dry run. Attempts have been made to divert the stream to one side or the other of the city, but all has been met with failure. As far back as the 1880s, the floods visited the west side of the city. In the spring of 1880, 3 persons lost their lives by the sudden rising of the stream. The city knew this was going to be an issue, so they had to construct this massive sewer. This massive sewer, which extended over 4,000 feet. Now, what is odd, around this same time, many other cities across the United States would also use the same narrative. There were floods, and the cities either had to be raised, and what was oddly found was a massive underground network. Now, what's even more bizarre is that newspapers would talk about the sewer in Iowa being under construction. They would even show photos of it. but they would never show photos of anybody working on the tunnel. This sewer, that is supposed to be very famous, mentioned in newspapers across the world, where you have prominent people, politicians, coming to dine in, there are very, very few photos of. And in photos, this sewer looks like it has been completed for quite some time. You also have to ask yourself, why did it take them so long to construct this sewer? This dry run was a problem for quite some time. There were floods. You would think the first thing they would do is to build a sewer system before they build the city. The city of Waterloo, Iowa was first settled in 1845. Almost 50 years later, they built a proper sewer system. That doesn't make much sense. They already had roads down. Imagine all the extra work they had to go through to build this massive sewer system throughout the city. And yet, like I said, there are no photos of any construction taking place of this sewer system. What's even more bizarre is that Waterloo during that time was a small town with an even smaller population. So it's pretty odd they would build such a massive sewer system for such a small town. But going back to the actual banquet, the actual event that was mentioned in newspapers around the world, in October 15th, 1903, a Waterloo Daily reporter hailed the feast as a grand success. Visitors went away well pleased. Here are a few excerpts. Most beautiful sight, a number of powerful arc lamps were strung about the banquet hall entrance, which was elegantly decorated with evergreens and bunting flags, giving the exterior a magnificent appearance as one actually entered the sewer. However, the view was long to be remembered. Not one of those in attendance had ever before witnessed such a dazzling sight, and without exception, the visitor would remain standing on the final flight of the stairs to obtain a good view of the long table in the banquet hall. Because of the limited capacity of the hall, the first course of oyster cocktail, etc., had already been placed on the table before the visitors were seated. The balance of the courses, however, were all served and in the best manner, although the space left for attendees to pass through the files of those seated was comparatively small. The dry rum punch was a delectable dish, attracted no little attention. This dry rum punch was the favorite of the dinner, and the attendees could not get enough of it. And indeed they did not, because as the toast lasted 90 minutes, placed at each place of the banquet table was a souvenir glass containing cigars and matches. The glasses bore an appropriate inscription, and in each case were carried away as a remembrance of the banquet. The menu cards were also preserved by those attending, and the thoughts of the sewer banquet will linger long in the minds of everyone who has actually eaten in the sewer. This is remarked by Scott Beason, the well-known Illinois Central official. So that goes to show they are coming from all over the country. We even have officials from Illinois making their way to a small town in Iowa to partake in this dinner underground. We even have others stating that they have attended banquets in New York, Chicago, the West, North, and the South. But never in my life have I ever enjoyed an affair of that kind more than I did last evening. Waterloo people can now hardly appreciate the value of such a unique event. It was great. What is so unique about this banquet? The only difference is the location. It is oddly in some freshly built sewer, or so we're told. These people attending this banquet in the sewer, they were wealthy for their time, they had money. So I'm sure they have dined on delectable food like oysters and other things of that nature. But what really stood out was this dry run punch. Months later, Strand magazine would write about the banquet in March of 1904, as if to suggest a danger happily past. The rain was falling outside, but no fear of the flood troubled the gathering. The banquet was as successful as the construction of the sewer itself, and those who were privileged on this memorable occasion were able to partake of dry run punch, drank it with special gusto. This little joke of the caterer was duly appreciated. the dessert was as happily chosen, for it ended with Roquefort and water crackers. So whatever this dry run punch happened to be, where these people were toasting it for about 90 minutes, happened to separate this banquet from other events, from other banquets. Newspapers around the world carried the story of this magnificent banquet. The October 15th New York Times headline, "Banquet Given in a Sewer. League of Iowa Municipalities Entertained in the Storm Drain at Waterloo." The only photo of this grand event just shows the table, the chairs, and sometimes this random man that's staring at the camera. There are no other photos of this grand event or the attendees, which is very odd. You would think they would at least show the photos of the food itself, this grand course, especially this dry run punch they keep raving about. The only photos we get is a long table that is bare of any food, these very odd looking black chairs, and sometimes this one gentleman will appear in a photo. But somebody else had to be inside this sewer alongside this gentleman taking this photo. Who exactly was taking this photo? Well, the person taking this photo was none other than an individual named J.P. King, who we will talk about later in this video. Now, as I stated previously, this banquet took place in October, but if you go to the Library of Congress, you will find an interesting photo. On the left, it says photographs by J.P. King, Waterloo, Iowa, but on the right, it oddly says Illinois Central Excursions, South, May 18th to the 29th, 1903, the same year, but a different month and a different location. So I have a couple questions. Is this one big networking tunnel system? And two, was the photo on the right that's dated May 18th to the 29th used as a promotion for the event that took place in October in Iowa? Because like I said, there are absolutely no photos of this event in October, that reporters keep quoting these prominent people where they're raving about it. So it looks like this photo on the left that is supposed to represent this event in October happened months earlier. What's scary is that this looks like one big never-ending system, one big never-ending network that connects to other cities, to other towns, to other states. So it gives credence to the idea that these tunnels, like the ones found in New York, might be older than we think, much older, and they're just being expanded upon. There could just be networks upon networks upon networks across the entirety of the United States, to possibly even other places. What's even more bizarre is the name, the Illinois Central Excursion. That has nothing to do with sewers. It's a railroad system. So is this a part of some railroad expansion, perhaps even some underground railroad? So that begs the question, what is this? Is this a railroad system or is it a sewer? Well, there is a little bit more evidence that this was a part of some kind of railroad system, because on May 22nd, 1903, there was a newspaper that stated the photographer J.P. King was a part of the Illinois excursion, involved in some kind of railroad expansion, more than likely to take photos of this railroad expansion. So this pretty much matches with the May date in the photo. The article states that the Illinois Central Southern Land Excursion, which left the city last Wednesday night, has reached Memphis in the magnificent special train. Why am I getting thoughts of that movie Midnight Meat Train, which involved lizard people eating people? But anyway, 120 real estate men, mostly from Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, are with the excursion. Now, there's another YouTuber, Mine Unveiled, who happened to make an amazing video about this little piece of history, and he found out that this J.P. King is not mentioned anywhere when it comes to this October banquet. The only time you see his name mentioned is in this photograph, but nowhere in any news article that discussed this banquet does it state that J.P. King was there or taken any photographs. The only time J.P. King is mentioned in any news articles is when he's connected to the May, Illinois excursion. So it's kind of looking like this sewer story was a made-up story, but why? J.P. King and other individuals who are connected with this excursion are also oddly mentioned attending other banquets, yet his name does not appear in any news articles that reference this October 15th banquet. Also, let's go ahead and take a look at this photo. For something that is new, for something that is brand new, the sewer, these walls look kind of beat up and old. And if you look at the photo itself, if you look at the table, the color of the table, the colors of the flowers look a little bit more doctored than if you look at the man. So it looks like there's some doctoring going on here in this photo. If we compare the noise detail with the table and the guy with the hat, it's clearly not the same. There's definitely some manipulation going on here with this photo. What's even more bizarre is that this supposed tunnel that was built to stop a flood from happening in the city never did the job, this massive tunnel, as this city over time would continue to get flooded. From the 1920s to the 1940s and onward, this city would get massive floods, which is kind of bizarre given the fact they have this new massive tunnel system to stop these floods. So even back then, they were lying about the main narrative of the tunnel. But as I said previously in this video, we had a bunch of men from Mason City who belonged to a society known as the Oddfellows that were involved in this Illinois Central excursion were leaving and heading to Iowa. But before that, these Oddfellows, this brotherhood, they went to Mason City to attend exercises of the new Oddfellows Orphans Home for the state of Iowa. Now, what's scary is that Waterloo, Iowa, where this banquet took place, is associated with a number of brotherhoods. But more importantly is the fact that there is a orphan home. This J.P. King, the photographer, is also oddly the photographer for the Oddfellows and has taken numerous pictures inside this orphanage. So let's add it all up. We have a conflicting story between a secret underground sewer, a tunnel, that is supposedly also a railroad system. We have a secret society, a brotherhood known as the Oddfellows. We have an orphanage, an orphan home that's also connected right back to them. And then we have this bizarre photographer that is taking photos of this orphanage and this bizarre sewer that's also a railroad. Well, my horror senses are definitely going off and is telling me that this is not good when you have all of those connected. Also, oddly enough, if you look up J.P. King, the only photos you're going to find are of this orphanage and this nursery home that are connected to the Oddfellows Brotherhood and this supposed sewer. Now, what's even more bizarre is that this banquet, this supposed banquet, is not the first of its kind. Matter of fact, there was a news article months after this October banquet in 1904, Banquet in a Conduit. Chicago comes to Waterloo for ideas of a feast. 600 served at tables over 3 blocks long. Banqueters were 40 feet below surface of the earth. So this feast would happen again, but with attendees from Chicago, including were President Albert G. Wheeler Jr. and General Manager George Washington Jackson of the Illinois Tunnel Company. Mr. Wheeler is quite well known in the Waterloo because of his work here in connection with organizing the Commonwealth. So after this banquet, Chicago went ahead and had their own banquet that was held in that portion of the company's underground workings lying underneath Jackson Boulevard between Franklin and Clark Street. This time, guests were given rides 3 miles through the tunnel in 20-mile-per-hour electric cars. The banquet room had an orchestra at both ends, one at Clark Street and another at Franklin Street, more than likely to drown out the screams. This one-of-a-kind unique event where we have the so-called elite eating underground is now taking place in Chicago. But it wouldn't just be Chicago, As in 1916, a newly completed tunnel, as so they say, the mayor conducted a banquet, a feast, underground. Matter of fact, not just a tunnel, but a intricate maze of tunnels. These people happen to be 100 feet underground and paid $25 a plate, which during that time was a lot of money. But it probably didn't matter to them because, like I said, those eating underground and attending this banquet were wealthy. These were wealthy people. Matter of fact, to show you that you had to be wealthy to eat there, $25 in 1916 is compared to $700, over $700 in today's money. I mean, even read this bizarre article. At $25 a plate dinner 100 feet underground, the formal transfer to Mayor Kyle was the climax to an unusual celebration in a section of the sewer underneath the streets at Montrose Avenue and Rucker Street. A section of the sewer was transformed into a banquet room, and the 192 guests, including city officials and bankers, today the so-called elite, were taken to the festive board in an elevator cage which had been used by workmen who constructed the sewer. Just think about that for a second. The so-called elite gathering in a caged elevator to go 100 feet underground to have dinner. That right there is nightmare fuel. Also, what is odd is that during this dinner, 19 policemen had showed up at the tunnel's entrance to guard the tunnel, because the mainstream narrative is that one of the workmen got angry and threatened to throw an explosive down this tunnel, and so they hired policemen to completely guard this tunnel. It kind of gives me that feeling when we look at that secret tunnel that was found in New York City and we see the police. They're dragging these individuals away from these tunnels and they're claiming they locked them up. It gives me the feeling after reading this that the police are in on it, that nobody's going to get in any trouble. They hurried along and closed up this tunnel. But I am sure there's other entrances. Why would these workers even want to destroy this tunnel in St. Louis in the first place? Unless something else was going on in these tunnels and they caught wind of it. But they were enraged about something going on down there and they wanted to destroy it, if that is the official narrative that we're going to follow. What's even more bizarre, like in every other story, we're not shown any photos of the guest of this banquet taking place, of the food. We're just told that a banquet took place and here's photos of the table as proof. Now, what's even more bizarre is that there are a lot of cities with the name Waterloo. In Canada, there's a city named Waterloo, and there were potholes that unearthed miles of secret tunnels. The excuse is that while the origin and the purpose of the Waterloo tunnels remains a mystery to scholars and the public, many theories have arisen. The Waterloo Historic Society, they state that the tunnels were dug by Abraham Erb, the first settler in that area, to transport elect German erotica to St. Jacobs. Contrasting this theory, the rival Historical Society of Waterloo says that they are most likely bunkers built by residents of the town during the War of 1812 to hide their cider and quilts from the rampaging Americans. Well, as history has shown, we cannot trust the official narrative, and these tunnels perhaps connect to other tunnels, which connect to other tunnels that connect to other tunnels. But what is known is that they are stopping residents from Waterloo and elsewhere from exploring these tunnels on their own. But after they clean these tunnels up of whatever's down there, they're now going to start offering tours to explore these tunnels in Waterloo, Canada. But now I leave the rest of the video up to you. What was going on inside these sewers? What were these banquets and what were they hosting? And more important, what exactly was that run punch? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow. Once again, thank you so much for your support.